We haven't even closed out the first full week of March yet, and we already have several moves that are going to make huge impacts on the fantasy landscape in 2025. Headliner Nation, I'm here today to get you caught up on all the happenings of the past week and why several of the moves have some big fantasy implications that we want to keep in mind over the offseason. I think it's safe to say that we already know the biggest move of last week, and that was the San Francisco 49ers trading Deebo Samuel to the Washington Commanders. And it only took a 5th round pick to get it done. Let's go ahead and touch on the fantasy value for the San Francisco 49ers first. And a lot of this is going to depend on the health of Brandon Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey. Come week 1 of the regular season, how will these guys look? Will Brandon Ayuk be back on the field yet? Is Christian McCaffrey going to be healthy, but maybe with a limited workload? Maybe he doesn't get really any targets moving forward. If that all ends up being the case, then there's definitely going to be an opportunity for Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall both to have fantasy value next season. For me, when I evaluate San Francisco this offseason, I want to try and find the best value possible. And when you take a look at Pearsall and Jennings, Pearsall's ADP is going to end up being higher than Jennings. To end the season, Pearsall had 18 targets and scored a touchdown in back-to-back games. And he had 141 receiving yards against the Detroit Lions in Week 17. George Kittle will still be the number 1 target in this offense, but Brandon Ayuk, if he's not on the field and healthy for Week 1, it's definitely going to give these guys a lot of opportunity for some fantasy value. Now, when it comes to the Washington Commanders, I really don't think this hurts Terry McLaurin whatsoever. Now, will he see maybe a little bit of a dip in targets? It's possible, but last season, Jaden Daniels was working with just a cast-off of secondary targets, it felt like. Terry McLaurin had 117 targets last season, which he could still very realistically end up hitting. And then when you look at the cast behind him, Zach Ertz had 91. Olamide Zaccheaus had 64. And then you take a look, Noah Brown, Austin Eckler, Diami Brown. None of those guys are going to deserve the type of targets that Deebo Samuel gets. So if there's anybody out there concerned about Deebo hurting Terry McLaurin, don't be. If anything, this makes me actually like Terry McLaurin even that much more, because needing to respect the run game and Deebo Samuel over the middle of the field is still going to give Terry McLaurin a whole lot of room to work. This is no shock to absolutely anybody, but T. Higgins is getting franchise tagged for a 2nd straight season. Now, from a fantasy perspective, it really depends on what Cincinnati ends up doing here, because once again, they're saying we are tagging T. Higgins, hoping to work towards a long-term deal. And I fully believe Cincinnati is going to try that. They're already making some moves. They released guard Alex Kappa, which I don't know if that was the best thing to do, but we'll see. And obviously, they need to get a deal done with Jamar Chase. Now, Jamar Chase is going to get done first. Before anything happens with T. Higgins, Cincinnati needs to figure out something with Jamar Chase. And Max Crosby just got a new deal that made him one of the highest paid players in all of the NFL and the highest paid outside of the quarterback position. Jamar Chase is probably going to pass that. But obviously, we already know that if T. Higgins stays in Cincinnati, you've got a guy that can provide you some wide receiver 1 upside, but that we should think about as being a wide receiver 2 a little bit more. Jamar Chase is a guy that's going to have high-end wide receiver 1 upside no matter what. But outside of those 2 guys, with the exception of running the ball with Chase Brown, there isn't a really whole lot when it comes to weapons behind them. So if T. Higgins ends up staying in Cincinnati, I think everything ends up being just fine for everyone involved. Also, Joe Burrow MVP season incoming. Sam Darnold is not going to get the franchise tag from the Minnesota Vikings. They decided as the deadline passed to go ahead and let him test free agency, and more than likely Sam Darnold will be doing just that. And it doesn't feel like Sam Darnold is getting the opportunity to test the free agent market while Minnesota waits to make a decision. I think their mind is already made. They're not paying him for a reason, because their quarterback for next season is already on the roster with J.J. McCarthy. And look what Sam Darnold did this past season. J.J. McCarthy is just as good, if not better, than Sam Darnold already at this point. Justin Jefferson will be fine. Jordan Addison will be fine. T.J. Hawkinson will be fine. The one thing I would like Minnesota to do, though, find the run game. When you see a team make a deal for an offensive lineman, the first kind of thoughts that come to you are, how does this affect the team in its current state? So when the Chicago Bears traded for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney this past week, the first thing came to basically everybody's mind. This is great for Caleb Williams. Protect him, keep him upright, give him more time to throw, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore. But my mind went elsewhere, and it went to a video that I did either last week or a couple of weeks ago, where I talked about the Chicago Bears being a dark horse place for running back Ashton Jeanty to land in this year's NFL draft. And at the time, it may have sounded a little bit crazy, but now that the Chicago Bears have addressed their offensive line through trades, they don't necessarily need to draft an offensive lineman at number 10 overall. In fact, now they could do a couple of different things. And at number 10 overall, I highly doubt that Jeanty ends up getting there, because I would be shocked if he gets past the Las Vegas Raiders. But Ben Johnson, new head coach, comes from Detroit, where they spent some high draft capital on Jahmyr Gibbs and were laughed at for it. They also signed David Montgomery in free agency. And by the way, the current running back in Chicago, DeAndre Swift, was there in Detroit when Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell sent him packing in favor of Monty and Gibbs. Do not be shocked if Chicago now spends their first round pick on an offensive weapon at the running back position for Ben Johnson, whether it be moving up to number 5 to try and trade for Jeanty, or whether it's Omarion Hampton at number 10. The Aaron Rodgers experiment in New York is coming to an end, and that even solidified even more this past week when they released his buddy Davante Adams. And now, outside of Garrett Wilson, the cabinet in the New York Jets offense is pretty darn bare. We don't even know who their quarterback is going to be at this point. So when you take a look at what's happening in New York, you got to feel for Garrett Wilson. Obviously, they're not bringing Sam Darnold back. That's not going to happen. I highly doubt that they're going to do very much else at the quarterback position either. I don't see a Justin Fields. I don't see a Russell Wilson. They might try to make a move in the draft. Maybe Jackson Dart is their guy in the draft. We'll have to wait and see what happens with them, because there's way too many questions to still answer about that offense to make any definitive statements. For Davante Adams, for his first time, he gets to test free agency. I still think he has a little get up and go. He's starting to get up there, and maybe he isn't the same exact player he was back in Green Bay, but someone is going to decide to invest in him. And who knows, maybe it's Aaron Rodgers' new team. Well, the Seattle Seahawks decided that they wanted to do their best impression of Extreme Home Makeover, but on the offensive side of the football, because first, it was releasing Tyler Lockett. Not super shocking news, but then it was DK Metcalf saying, I want to trade, and Seattle saying, okay, we're going to try and make that work for you. And then to top everything off, they trade Geno Smith, their starting quarterback, to the Las Vegas Raiders for a 3rd round pick. And now when you take a look at the Seattle offense, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what you're going to be getting. As I see it, Seattle has essentially 3 options at the quarterback position. And until we see exactly what they're going to be doing, it's hard for me to invest fully in Jackson Smith-Njigba, taking his stellar breakout performance last season and duplicating it for an entire year. Number 1, they're probably looking at maybe an in-house candidate. That would be Sam Howell. Maybe they feel like that he is ready to take over the reins in Seattle, and they're going to give him an opportunity to maybe build on some of the good things that we saw while he was in Washington. Number 2, maybe they're looking via the free agent route, a Sam Darnold. Maybe they decide that they're going to make a deal for a guy like Kirk Cousins. Either of those 2 options would give them a veteran quarterback presence. And number 3, maybe they're looking at a guy like Jackson Dart. They're not going to be able to move up and get either of the top 2 options in this draft, but they may be able to move just enough to get Jackson Dart. How much that would end up taking to move, though, they may not be willing to go that far. And now that Las Vegas has their quarterback, I really am anticipating a running back now for them inside the top 10 of the NFL draft. As far as the rest of the offense shapes up, though, that we'll have to wait and see exactly what ends up happening. So for now, I'm not going to give too much in-depth analysis on what could happen for Las Vegas. Geno Smith is a good option for Brock Bowers, though, and should be able to get him the ball consistently. I think we just need some other weapons around them there. Jacksonville also making some changes on the offensive side of the ball, and you knew that was going to happen with a new head man that's offensive minded. But Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram both being gone, clearly the Jags feel like they already have the weapons in place to win without them. Christian Kirk was going to end up being released, but at the last minute, Houston steps in and they're able to make a trade to get Christian Kirk on the cheap. Now they've got somebody that can fit in for Tank Dell since he's more than likely going to miss the entirety of the season. But there is one guy that came to mind right away when we found out that Evan Ingram was being released. At first you think about it and you say, man, Evan Ingram was a pillar for Trevor Lawrence the last couple of years. But Brenton Strange made a little bit of an impact last season when Evan Ingram went down. And he was the guy that was able to find the end zone. And if you take a look at some of the remarks over the weekend from the Jags at the Combine, it was clear that Brenton Strange was somebody that they wanted to have a much larger role in their offense. And now by moving on from both of these guys, they can go ahead and let some of their younger, less expensive talent start to showcase what they are able to do. Right now, Brenton Strange is a fast riser. And I don't know if I would quite put him inside the top 12 just yet, but he's going to be very close and definitely has a shot at being a top 12 tight end. Christian Kirk in Houston, I don't mind that. I don't think he's going to be a fantasy winning player, but he's definitely a guy that for you larger rosters that run out wide receiver threes in your lineup, I don't mind Christian Kirk in that type of a capacity. And for Evan Ingram, I don't know when we're even going to see him on a team. The tight end market, there isn't a whole lot available, so I'm sure some team will look for him, but I don't know if he's going to have what he had in Jacksonville. Headliner Nation, let's just hope that all the moves that we saw in the first week of March are just a little sign of things to come for the rest of the offseason. Bigger trades, bigger free agent moves, and the NFL draft is right around the corner. Make sure you stick right here for all of the updates, breaking news, fantasy advice, draft profiles, everything that you need to be successful for all of your fantasy football leagues in 2025. Hit the like button, subscribe to stick around all offseason long, leave a comment down below as well. Let me know which one of these moves you think will end up having the biggest impact of 2025. And of course, Headliner Nation, stay safe and stay healthy. I'll see you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.